welcome again to PDMI East. We're glad to have you here. We're very, very excited to have the support of all of our attendees, our sponsors, the hotel, of course, and particularly our member councils at the PDMI. We have 6 member councils at the PDMI. 5 of the 6 are highlighting their sessions today. This session is actually put together by our workshop council, of which Patrick Raymond plays a big part in, and we're excited to have you here. If you want to get involved in education, if you want to be sitting on this stage or deciding who gets to sit on this stage, there's no better way than getting involved in our councils. They really have a big say in what we're talking about at the PDMI. So, and we're always looking for new council members, so we'd love to have you. So, of course, we'd like to say thank you to our education sponsor, in particular, Pacific Media Technologies. PMT has sponsored the education in the last 2 events, both in San Diego in October and here. And we're very thankful for that. PMT has a brief message to share with you.
Known for their superior quality and unequaled service, did you know that PMT is also an innovator in technologies that have transformed video ad services? PMT began investing in the latest cloud-based technologies and media tools several years ago with a simple goal in mind: to be recognized as the gold standard in quality and customer care. Today, PMT's services have transformed what brands and agencies have come to expect in video ad management and production services. Fast, highly responsive customer care and turnaround times with quality guaranteed. Pacific Media Technologies. Technology-driven, quality guaranteed.
So thank you again to PMT. We have a great panel. Patrick Raymond of Really Cool Ideas, legend in the creative production space in this business, and been at it for a long time. Christina Frugari, I messed it up anyway. No, Lockard and Wexler Direct, who is running advanced TV at LWD. C. Lauren Spalding from Farmers Insurance Group. Sia actually spoke for us on a webinar, I believe, last summer with Patrick, and we're excited to hear from her today. And last but not least, Andy Latimer of Blue Water Productions, Media, et cetera, of Blue Water. It's Blue Water. Thank you, everyone. I believe we've got a video to share to start.
Great.
Traditional makeup can make you look older, while Breeze is specially designed for maturing skin, helping it to look smooth and so much younger.
It's not caked on like the regular makeup.
Call or go to getbreeze.com now.
I have struggled to find coverage that covers my dark spots and uneven skin tone. With the Breeze, you can see it covering the flaws instantly.
Now there's a coverage to look flawless instantly. Luminous Breeze is the #1 selling airbrush makeup. Find Luminous Breeze Airbrush at getbreeze.com to try completely risk-free for 30 days for just $19.95 and get free shipping.
And I'm switching to airbrush with Luminous Breeze.
Breeze uses 10 times less makeup but gives 3 times the coverage without the cakiness.
This is amazing.
Give your beauty routine a makeover with the all-new Breeze. Available at Amazon.
I feel like I'm telling a best-kept secret. I have a lot of problem spots: redness, fine lines, dark spots, and now with the Breeze, all that's changed. It gives you skincare and makeup all in one. The results speak for themselves. It looks flawless.
That's the sound you crave, and the outdoor cooking fun and flavor that's better on a Blackstone. From tailgating to the patio, and even on-the-go adventures, it's better on a Blackstone. All your traditional grill favorites, and so much more. Breakfast? Better. Lunch? Better. Dinner? Yeah, it's better. Go to your nearest Blackstone retailer, or log on to blackstoneproducts.com and see the full line of Blackstones. That's the sound you crave and the outdoor cooking fun and flavor you can't get with anything else. Only on a Blackstone, the original flat top griddle. With more than 5 million griddles sold, Blackstone is the way America cooks outdoors.
Ever since I got the Blackstone griddle, I have been griddling on this thing literally every day.
It will cook everything you want.
Look at this cooking surface.
It's so versatile.
The sky is the limit with this thing. Quesadillas, smash burgers. I love my Blackstone. Just love it, love it, love it.
Step into the light and embrace your kingdom. Introducing the Disney Lion King collection from Sir John and Luminous Cosmetics, with 8 highly pigmented limited edition pieces inspired by the African landscape to bring out your inner lion. Step into the light and embrace your kingdom with the Lion King collection from Sir John and Luminous.
Hello, Ulta fans, Sir John here.
This look is called Perfect Harmony, inspired by Disney's The Lion King. So this is the first look I came up with when creating the palette. I love this green on the lids, and the blue in the corners of the eyes cascades very softly outward. And there's a beautiful soft brown matte lip. This matte lip is maybe a statement on others, but looks really, really great on Sydney's skin. The Perfect Harmony look. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did creating it. For more looks using the Lion King collection, visit luminouscosmetics.com/Disney. And don't forget to watch the movie, now playing.
So, welcome to our panel. So we selected some of the content there to really show the differences. Obviously, the traditional linear spot with the 800 number and URL. The more CTV-driven spots these days, just have the website, and then really a suite of content to really show the, sometimes blurring the lines between, is it an ad? Is it not an ad? What is the OTT experience? Is there a whole suite of content? And that's what we're going to talk about today. First, we're just going to introduce our panel here. And I'm going to let each of you guys just tell us a little bit about your background. Christina, tell us about your journey. And while you're doing that, tell us a little bit about what you've seen with CTV and what's happened during your career.
Yeah. So I've been on a 16-year journey that's got me here today. My background and my roots are really as a linear TV investment lead and negotiator in the upfront and scatter marketplaces, really focused on brand awareness efforts. As worlds converged, sales teams converged, so did my role, and I became much more integrated in negotiating not only linear TV commitments, but OTT, CTV, any really digital counterpart commitments as well. Advanced TV kind of came into the space, and it started to really interest me from the perspective of leveraging data, being more targeted, automation, and really having a better read on actually driving a business outcome and business growth for my clients. And that's really, fast forward, brought me today to my role at LWD. So I lead our advanced TV investments. But more so than that, I'm really focused on bringing together what is traditional direct response linear with connected TV and OTT investments to really capture the full breadth of the consumer in terms of reach, but also making sure that we're talking to the full prospecting audience and actually driving maximum return and response. And that's, it's been really exciting and bringing, a legacy world to a new world in video and how those two things kind of play together.
Great. And Cia Lauren, you've had quite the journey on your way to Farmers, so tell us.
Yeah, I'm an ad woman turned client. So I actually got my start on the agency side of the business, working for a full service creative agency on the account side, really sort of learning the fundamentals, right? Like understanding how print and traditional broadcast, radio, things like that are all put together. And I think that one of the things that was so interesting is like I was sort of getting my start as social media was becoming the hot new thing. And so when we were talking last night, I was telling the team that, you know, it's been quite the journey of sort of learning while you're doing and sort of understanding how to be doing both, right? Like learning the basics and then figuring out how that next new thing is going to sort of impact the work that you're doing. So back on the agency side was really sort of getting the fundamentals down and then made the transition over to the client side after getting my master's. And now I'm our director of advertising at Farmers Insurance, where I lead strategic and creative development for both of our brand and performance creative. So up and down the funnel, my team's covering all of that sort of work. And it's been a really interesting sort of journey to continue to try and embrace what is that new and interesting thing and how is it going to impact something traditional. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about today how that's impacting TV, CTV, and then sort of the social space. I think it'll be good.
Awesome. And congrats on 2 Addies this week, I think.
Yeah, we got three LA Addies this week, which was a really exciting win for the team. And looking forward to the rest of award season. It'll be awesome.
Very cool. Great. Andy Latimer.
Hi guys, I'm Andy, founder of Blue Water, CEO. Recently returning after a 3-year hiatus running a hotel, which was a fun and interesting step out. So I kind of come back to the industry with really fresh eyes and seeing it from a bit of a different perspective. My journey's been, from starting Blue Water as a creative agency, ultimately adding media over onto it, adding digital. We at one point acquired an Amazon management company, so we do Amazon management, really understanding the entire consumer journey across it. And then now heavily focused on how analytics ultimately lead to optimization across both your media spend and of course your creative content, because if I could say anything now, we are in the age of content, and if we're not rethinking the way we thought it was before, then we're going the wrong direction. So,
excellent. Well, I think the first thing we'll jump into, Christina, is the viewing habits. I mean, we certainly have made a giant jump, especially during the pandemic. So, tell us your view on this.
I think as we start to think about a cross-platform strategy inclusive of linear and CTV and bringing these two pieces together, we have to really start with the viewer and the experience that viewer and prospective target audience has as they're watching content. Linear TV, the viewer has become very accustomed to the way that ad pods and content is served. It's still, to some degree, an appointment viewing platform. You're actually tuning in to watch a sports game, you're tuning in to watch a primetime show, you're watching your favorite news channel. You know what you're gonna get, you understand the ad load. In the connected TV world, it's much more an on-demand environment. You're pulling that content in when you wanna watch it, where you wanna watch it. It doesn't necessarily have to be in your living room, it could be anywhere that you're on the go. The ad pods, in some cases, are non-existent, they're growing, but in most cases, they're very small. So it could be a 60-second ad pod. So you're reaching somebody who's in a very different mindset when they tune into connected TV than they are with linear television, regardless of the fact that to them it's television. They don't know the difference. They want to watch their favorite show. It's just how they go about tuning into it. So as marketers and performance marketers, it really lends to the fact that the creatives that we put on each of these platforms have to be formatted for that viewing experience. That's the best way to get an audience to, 1, be engaged and connect with your content, and 2, which is most important to all of us, drive a response. So for linear television, formats tend to be longer form, a lot of information up front, still use of TFNs. As you mentioned earlier, on the digital side, we're looking at more driving to web, driving to app download, a very quick, digital type transaction. A shorter ad unit length to make sure that we're not as intrusive within the content, but we're impactful and actually gaining that response. And we're looking at driving straight to URL, having a really strong call to action, and making sure that what you put out there in that 30 seconds or 15 seconds is the best message, the best offer with the strongest call to action right up front for that viewer. They're going to tend to be a more digital savvy consumer if they're watching that way, and they'll learn more as they go to the site on your product and actually drive that transaction for you.
Yeah, it's interesting just because it's fun when your creative and your media are aligned, right? And I think we have the same sort of perspective on this. I think it's all about optimizing the ad experience. So while all of that makes perfect sense from a media standpoint, there's also the creative side to consider, right? And making sure that the content that you're developing is sort of fit to that place and it feels native and sort of right to that experience. And not just in sort of like overarching approach, but also in some of the technical pieces. So one of the things that I think is so important to get right when it comes to CTV is like we've had this, exponential growth in CTV over a shortened period of time, right? The pandemic really changed viewing habits in a major way, and we're kind of flying the plane while we're on it in a lot of ways. And so when it comes to figuring out what creative to be using in those places, I think a lot of us sort of knee-jerk reaction was using your digital creative, right? Like things that you might have already had available to you because CTV is connected, so it's streaming, so it kind of aligns with what we've been doing in OTT, which was traditionally seen on laptops, tablets, mobile, things like that. And I think that one of the things creatively that I know that my team has really been drilling into is how do we make sure that that's not just the right creative, but also the right format for that creative. So things like clickable elements, things like captioning, all of that kind of stuff, I think originally we were thinking of it more in the digital space, and now I'm sort of wondering if we should be thinking of it more like traditional television, what's old is new again, right? That kind of thing, and making sure that we're not doubling down and putting something that has subtitles up on the big screen, right? Like that might not make sense. So I think it's really about making sure that you really understand exactly where your creative's going to be running, particularly with partners that have multiple different kinds of capabilities, people that are running on CTV but might also be in a more traditional space, to make sure that you put the right creative in the right place and then optimize the technical bits to make sure that it's the best ad experience for the user, because they are expecting more in today's age.
Yeah, look, it's beyond audience segmentation. Like we've been doing audience segmentation for years, figuring out where the audience was. This is much more specific, right? We're able to get in not only from the technical capacity of what the creative needs to be, how it needs to be structured, but what is actually creating a response and engagement is different in each of these environments. And I agree with you. See, we're kind of on a collision course, right? Where cable and CTV and OTT are coming to a head where they're basically becoming more and more similar in the nature. They're now offering channel flipping on Pluto, on Tubi, on multiple places where you can get a traditional cable experience. And trust me, I've talked to partners in Tennessee Valley Authority that they're saying we're not doing cable anymore. We're shipping out TiVo units, and everything's going over our fiber connectivity. So even on that provider level, there's some shifts that we have to respond to and understand. But the consumer engages slightly differently in that environment, right? So to your point, yes, we're flying the plane out in the air, and maybe we're still building the engine while we're doing it because the price points are we still have to figure out where it works inside there. As you start to look at CTV and optimizing the ad experience, even from a testing capacity, when we start to think about, okay, how do I test in this space? Well, I can't test with a blanket buy when I have a minimum of $50,000 to put out there, and I'm in a performance space. So I have to test programmatically, and then I have to come back behind that and then do the bigger buy and assume that's going to flight and give me the response, right? Mm-hmm. So there's just some distinct differences when we start to play in this space. And to your point, it's all about the content in the end, right? What content are you serving and what platform, and how that's going all the way back. It's how that connects to the consumer. Yeah. And some of it may not be the content we're used to producing so far today. Mm-hmm. We may have to change.
Totally.
Absolutely. So with that, during the pandemic, our audience has dramatically shifted, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that, Christina.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a little bit here, but when the pandemic happened, there was a mass acceleration of CTV viewership. We were all home. We didn't have really anything else to do other than search for content. Content was sort of dried up on the linear side. Production was slowed down. And so there was a tremendous amount of investment in content on the streaming side to bring new original series to the light. And that really drove subscription viewership, digital viewership. Before the pandemic, I probably would have said, this is a great medium to reach 18 to 34. This is a great way to complement what you're doing in linear and reach that younger audience that's really hard to reach. Fast forward after the pandemic, it's really transcended generations. I mean, we are now integrating it across all campaigns, even with older skewing campaigns. It's still a great complement to linear. It's by no means a full replacement, but the two pieces of the pie now fit together a little bit differently than they did before. So to Andy's point, we've been doing audience segmentation for quite some time.
Right.
On the linear side, we're pulling rankers, we're understanding where the audience exists. We have to take that same approach with CTV, but also understand on both platforms what type of audience we're reaching and how they work together. So I think that's a pretty big strategic focus for us in our planning process, is thinking about what the target audience is, what the objective of this campaign is, what the KPI is, and where does that audience live on both sides, and what platforms best cater to reaching that audience to really dip that toe to realize if we're getting the response back that we need.
And I think with that, with like focusing on those different audiences and knowing that everybody is sort of there, I think where you naturally go creatively is like, should we be developing custom content? We have these increased targeting capabilities. How do we make sure that we're giving these audiences exactly what it is that they're looking for? And I say that, and at the same time, that's a scary thought, because that also requires a whole lot of money. And given the current sort of economic climate and marketing budgets being impacted how they are, it's really hard to be pulling in more and more money for bespoke content for each of these different target audiences. And so I think one of the big things that I'm really leaning into is figuring out how we can develop content that is like customized to that target and really resonates with them without alienating that wider audience. So making sure that whoever else is exposed to that, whether or not that's through the targeting and how the media is running, or in the experience itself, right? Knowing we're back on the big screen in the living room and there might be other people around, it's really making sure that that creative is hitting on that target audience, it's doing what it needs to do for them, but it's not alienating anyone else sort of in the process.
Yeah, it dead on. Look, it's beyond it. Alienation is part of it, but I think resonating with the audience is key, and having an authentic feeling content in that space, right? So, Blackstone, we've been blessed to be, involved with them for the last 6 years and kind of helped them rise from $5 million in sales to $700 million in sales. And a lot of that's been on the content strategy, right? How are we going to create sticky content when we now understand that the top funnel piece, I can sprinkle the top funnel, and if any of you guys know, Wired's, long tail theory, right? Sprinkle the top, we're going to get a big pop on the top of it, and then it's going to be a long run out when you're going to get a return that's equal to what you put in on the top. It's just going to take longer to get it. Well, now with content, if you're creating sticky content that's coming on the bottom of this, you can raise that tail all along. So as you're sprinkling on the top with ad dollars and getting your top funnel traffic, now on the back end, you can be engaging the consumer and carrying your overall raise and your value and your return of what you're getting. That's hard to say to a lot of performance marketers. And we talked about this like last night, like you got to stick in this for a year before you're going to see that full return, and you have to commit to that. So it's going to take some thinking from a lot of people, not just on this up here, those of us who sell advertising and creative, but how we think of it from the brand side of it, how we think about how the dollars are allocated to the point of how much of it's media and how much of it's creative, because a lot more of it's going to have to be creative, because to meet these channels of distribution and to get the right content there, you need more content. That's the hardest thing to get around, but you can't go back to the CFO and say, hey, yeah, that money I just spent on that creative, I'm going to need that twice again, to get it there. So I think one of the other big things is thinking about how you create in the front end of it. If you're not cascading that creative out in your original creative strategy, and you're not looking at everywhere you're going to distribute and creating that content on the front end of it, you got to rethink it a little bit and kind of get back into that core.
It also opens up like a whole new world of performance marketing and really understanding how to evaluate creative effectiveness, not just media efficiency and making sure that your dollars are working hard for you, you're getting that ROI, but also sort of like uncovering this whole new world of metrics that you can have your teams buy into, your leadership buy into, to help sell that story. And I think that a lot of times we're having that conversation with the C-suite, is they understand sort of return, but they're not really equipped with the metrics that they need to sort of evaluate the creative performance. And so I think that's a big challenge on the creative side of things, is really understanding what other brands are doing and what other metrics you might be able to ladder up to go hand in hand with those media metrics and help sell in that vision that you have for the short term and the long term.
Yeah, it's validating response along the way, and I think that's where CTV and OTT is great, right? We can go in and we can be very specific on who's watching. We can retarget them. We can give them additional messages, so we can test our messaging in that space as well, right? And if creative and media are working together and that analytics are playing back and forth, we can say, and now we can get granular on who's watching very specifically and how that individual actually responded. Now you're getting into a place where you can really fine tune the creative going down this funnel, maybe before you bring it back to the cable side of it and say, hey, look guys, now we've refined the message perfectly and we see exactly where that is, and then bring your segmentation back into the cable side of it. So it's to your point, it's a cool time because there's so much data. It's how you read the data now is the key. We used to say, look, I can give somebody the same piece of paper and they're going to look at it and they're going to say one thing, but if they don't know how to read the book, they might read it backwards. So the problem now is we all have to learn how to read these books because they're new books.
Totally.
All of them. So.
Great. So Andy, you started talking about our next topic a little bit there, but that's great. You know, when we're thinking about our content creative strategy up front, you know, it really is that kind of constant content that we have to be ready for anymore. You know, sharing a little bit, you know, of what we did with Disney, you know, it's like we had to up front think, okay, I need 60 pieces of content to keep serving it up. Because you have to think about, you know, what are people going to react to, and so tell me about that and how you deal with your campaigns.
Look, it's about a cascade, right? Because you got to look, like I said, you got to look at the top funnel, and yes, hey, cable still works, direct response still works. Nobody panic, we're all okay. It's still working. So, but on the same end of it, you can build these brands much bigger, much longer, right? You know, we saw it like with Tommy John, similar to what you did with Disney, right? Where we had 24 pieces of content that were to be distributed out in digital through social, through all the platforms on that side of it, and 2 main pieces of content for CTV and for you know, broadcast and cable. Well, those messages, it was the cascade of the message that got the engagement long term. And again, we brought awareness to the position with the buy up front, but really carried the audience. Same thing with Blackstone. We sat down 6 years ago and said, listen guys, this is a long road we're on. To get where you want to go and to control the grilling market and to take, you know, 20-25% of the grilling market, you have to be consistent, and you cannot expect you can get there in a day, and you can't expect you can even get the inventory in to be able to take that kind of market, right? So laying it out long term and saying, and having a much longer term strategy going, like, okay, how are we going to engage on Facebook? How are we going to engage in CTV? How are we going to engage OTT? How are we going to engage in TikTok? Who the hell would have thought that TikTok was going to deliver a sale for a Blackstone griddle that the consumer is a male consumer over 45? Who the hell thought that would be highly responsive? I didn't. I told him it was a bad idea. I said, we're going to try it anyway. I said, great. Now let's figure out the content that goes down that path, right? So as you look long term, building consistent, sticky content, staying with it, and taking a portion of your media budget and saying, I need to allocate these dollars towards long-term constant content creative. You have to be relevant, you have to be up to the day, and you have to be creating things that are engaging on a constant basis. And the crazy part is the more you get out there, the more touch points that consumer gets. You can build tribes around brands. If you go right now and you ask anybody who has a Blackstone or is or has an outdoor griddle, if they give you another brand, I would be shocked. Because it becomes part of who they are. They drape that brand over them. They wear it like a coat. The consumer today, if you engage them with sticky content on the backside of it, you're going to be able to hold them and have brand ambassadors that carry you a long way. A little more difficult in the direct response side of it if you're just dealing with a frontline metric. But if you're building long-term brand out of it and you want to build something that gets an exit, like we've all seen in this industry over the last few years, when 500 million here, 700 million there, you know, you have to build it out long term. So and to your point, you have to think about where and how that content's going to engage in those places.
Totally. I mean, I think that's the key when it comes to developing that creative content is the forethought, right? Is planning ahead and understanding how you're going to use all those different pieces in different places, and also figuring out if they work. I know we're going to talk a little bit about collaboration later, but I do think that this is a really great opportunity not to just be partnering with your creative and your media teams, but also with your platform partners, because they have a wealth of knowledge about how those consumers want to engage with content on their platforms that can help you maneuver or shift or slightly tweak to be a better experience on their individual platforms. So I think one of the things that we're really making sure that we do is lean into our partnerships with our different platforms and really get a deep dive at a pretty, semi-regular cadence because things are changing so quickly. Just because you had your big planning meeting at the beginning of the year and they're going over the trends from last year and you kind of understand what's going on, doesn't mean that's going to hold by the end of this quarter. And so making sure that you're consistently touching base with your different partners, and not just internally but also externally, to better understand what's happening on their platforms and how should you adjust to be more relevant in those spaces.
Yeah. I would add to that, I think one of the more interesting pieces is the storytelling narrative you can now create across a traditional screen to a digital screen.
Oh, yeah.
And that digital screen can be transactional. So you can start your messaging on the big screen in linear television and retarget them across smaller devices where they have the ability to actually transact in real time when that wasn't available before. The shoppable capabilities, the use of QR codes we were talking about, that really just drives a very instantaneous action on the consumer's behalf that doesn't involve them really making another step. It's very seamless today, and those capabilities change every day. There's new types of ad units you can take advantage of. And so staying on the pulse of that and understanding how the messaging plays in the wider video landscape, I think is really critical to finding success and the longevity of it.
Yeah, I like to tell our crew, our team all the time, our producers and directors and creative talent, right? Look, yes, we're producing content for a different space, but don't forget where we come from. We're still in an industry of driving response. So even though we're trying to tailor this content for the right space where it's going into distribution, where it's engaging with our customer, our viewer, our follower, our tribe, if you will, we still have to have the trigger that brings them back to get a transaction, because we're still judged on how much money did the campaign make and how much is that content that we're creating returning to us. So we kind of live in that space of both. So a lot of content, but don't forget the trigger. It brings them back home.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to that. I think everything that you guys just said, I think the big thing is that we remain, as content creators and also on the media side, that we remain nimble, because everything changes every 6 months in this world anymore.
Every 6 weeks.
Again, back to the Blackstone working on TikTok. So let's talk a little bit about optimizing our creative and especially the micro targeting in ways that we approach our creative.
Targeting the creative, right? When we start to look at, and optimization is the key, right? So we kind of found ourselves in this situation where we had creative and media in one house, right? That created a hell of an opportunity for us to really play for the last 7-8 years, where we've been able to say, look, if we start to look at the analytics that are driving, we can take the analytics and not just change what we're buying, but change what creative messaging is working. CTV and OTT and all these points of engagement, when you start breaking down the creative that's getting you response and engagement, the learnings that start to come from that side of it is way beyond taking a half-hour show and doing a minute-by-minute analysis where you're figuring out the points that sell. You can get highly granular, not just where it sold, but what were the second, third, fourth, and fifth message you sent them that got them to convert? What's the consumer journey? If you're not building out that optimization beyond just the top funnel side of it, but building it across and understanding where the analytics are, you're not going to be able to get all the way through that path, right? So on our end, we step back in COVID and the pandemic and said, all right, we even have to get better with analytics. They have to be faster. They have to be at your fingertip. So we built an engine called Insight IQ that allows us to really see down to the second what's going on and be able to see where that response is coming from, whether it's on TV, whether it's on OTT, whether it's on CTV, whether it's coming through any of the cable or any of the digital platforms that are out there. If you can start to see what's working in those spaces and then analyze it back, which hard to say to a creative, listen, man, I need you to spend the next 3 weeks really just breaking down everything that clicked and worked and why. And tell me whether it was the spatula flip that got them viewing and got them to convert, or whether it was the finished food on the front of it, right? What was it that drove them back? And which one works better? So we've got a creative out there for Blackstone where the guy starts and he flips a spatula. More people watch that video than anything that we have out there. However, nobody buys off that video. Nobody, but they'll watch the hell out of it. So it's understanding what you're doing to engage versus what you're doing to make the conversion, and then how you, once you get them in your funnel, what you tell them next, and what the progression of the sale in this world is paramount. because your creative can funnel down that path.
And I think internally, it's also a mindset shift. I think that's something that I'm sort of championing when we get to that creative development process, and particularly because I'm balancing both performance and brand creative, development and strategy. It's really changing the creative mindset to be thinking about what are we going to learn when we put this creative in market. So rather than put it out there, you have, and you're trying to deconstruct after the fact, how did it work?
Right.
I'm trying to flip that on its head and really think about that going in. So as we're, evaluating creative concepts before we even put those together, we're talking about, okay, well, when we put these things head to head, what are we going to learn from that? How is this work and the performance of this work going to impact what comes next? And so I think that front loading that makes the conversation on the back end a lot easier because there's clarity across the team understanding what we are going to learn instead of trying to, in the aftermath, pull it all apart. So I think changing that mindset and really thinking about designing for testing so that you're optimizing along the way, I think is really helpful, and not just for whatever is immediately at hand, but it also helps you build that playbook of learnings for your individual brand that you can apply for all of the creative yet to come.
Yeah, I think setting those guardrails up front, what we're going to learn, what are the metrics of success, what are the metrics of failure, there are times when you're going to fail, and what does that framework look like from a timing perspective, not just putting it on for 24 hours, not getting the response you need and pulling it down. Because Andy, to your point, it takes a little bit of a longer time frame to learn and optimize, and being really nimble to put in new creatives and make those adjustments where you see that insight come through, let's react really quickly in the marketplace. But
yeah, and I think that, to your point as well, the predictive side of it, when we start to get into the predictive analytics side of it and you're starting to look ahead, yes, the dissection of what worked and then applying that going forward, that takes a dialogue in your organization, whether you're on the brand side, the agency side or the creative side, no matter where you are in it, it takes a dialogue with your team to make sure they're thinking that way, because that's not traditionally how creatives think. Sorry to say this, but most creatives think creatively. They want to make cool stuff, right? They may not be thinking about the analytical impact of what's going to happen, and then getting them to understand how to think in that box of saying, hey, but why is it going down this path, and why are we making this creative this way, so they can get a better result. Let them be creative, but get them in the box where they're going down the right path so we can analyze it, right?
And I think you help support and foster trust among those teams by making sure that you aren't too quick to call it. I think, like you mentioned, like setting the timing up front is also really important, because you have, I think, at a very high level, a lot of leaders want to make those decisions very quickly, and we know sort of immediately. And if we've only been running for 3 days, we probably don't know. So it's making sure that you sort of set that up ahead of time. You have a clear understanding of how long you're going to give the work first, and I think that makes the creative team feel a lot more comfortable, because you're not going to make a rash decision with, statistically insignificant data. You're going to wait until you have what you need to make an informed decision, and then take it in and do something with it.
Yeah.
Can all of our clients listen to that, please? Don't react too fast. Take a minute to breathe. You'll be all right. Let enough data flow through. It's definitely on point.
Yeah. I think it lends really well to collaboration.
Exactly.
We're kind of just going from one topic to the next, and just being, one team and collaborating on both the creative and media sides. Because if a creative team doesn't understand where the media is living, it's impossible for them to create something that's impactful and is going to drive that response and performance. And if the media team doesn't get a chance to see the creative, they can't really share feedback on best practices and everything we're talking about today in terms of the viewing experience, the audience they're going after, and the end goal of whatever that campaign objective or testing framework is. So the two things really go hand in hand. And I mean, there's very little in this world where collaboration doesn't drive success. So I think on creative and media, it's kind of the perfect pairing. And when one goes forward without the other, you're sort of setting yourself up for even more challenge in this new world. And working together really does help bring the best practices and the learnings collaboratively together.
Yeah, and breeds excitement too, right? It gets everybody excited, it gets everybody pumped up. But I think I would extend that even further nowadays, and I already kind of mentioned this, but bringing in your platform partners as well, because they have an even stronger handle on their individual platform. So making sure that as you develop content or as you put the plan together, you're going back with them and making sure that this feels right for their placements. I think we've seen oftentimes that just because it works in one sort of social channel doesn't necessarily mean it'll work in another. And so partnering with those different platform reps is really what's going to get you the best work out there. And it helps with efficiency, especially if you're doing that early on in the planning process, making sure that as you lay out the foundation for how much creative or content you're going to be developing, you're making sure that you've slotted into where it works and then vetted that through the partners to make sure that it makes sense. So I think that's the added layer.
And their data set's much larger. Like,
Totally.
so they can, so like when we look at it and say, can I build indexes across categories, right? So I have a lot of outdoor data. I have a lot of senior and insurance data on that side of it. So I can build indexes across there and understand and have predictive performances, right? And know where they're going to work. But to your point, yes, the deeper you can get in those relationships with the providers on that side of it and understand the levels of data and get that moving in the right direction and get collaborations. I mean, part of our conversations at this conference, today or this week have been, how do we get better tied in on the fast channel side of it and on the digital streaming side of it and the CTV side of it? How do we get those where we can get better measurable results that fit the response-driven industry, right? Because we need to see the activity and the connection between it aired here, it came back here, the money came back here, and that's the challenge that I think we all need to collaborate with and ask our partners to say, look, help us develop better solutions in this environment that's going to give us better range to be able to test some of these strategies that are out there, because it is still a bit of an unknown world. Yeah. And like I said when we started the conversation, you're on a collision course. These guys are coming together, and at some point, that crossover, what's happening here, is going to be a new world. What's happened already from us on the content creation side of it, where we shifted and started creating original content to go out into syndication, to go out on fast channels, to go out into cable, that have embedded opportunities for us to drop advertising that aren't blatant infomercials. They're shows that happen to have products in it. With Blackstone, we have 2 13-episode series that are streaming out there right now that aren't, this is Blackstone infomercial, it is about cooking on a flat top. But that engagement that's happening is allowing for triggers to come back on that side of it. So it's, yes, collaboration, content creation across the board, and getting more engaged and finding these activations on the new platform as fast as you can, so you can test through the pieces that are working and test through the pieces that aren't working, and you can jettison the bad stuff, and let's all get to planning ahead for the good stuff.
Totally.
Great. I was just going to ask a follow-up to you, Andy, and Sia as well. I mean, it used to be back in the day where we would, we'd have a spot. A client would come and we would do either an infomercial or a 2-minute spot or a 1-minute spot, and that was exciting. We could test it, but in this day and age, you really do have to think about, it has to be constant content, and I think the mindset for brands, whether it's a large brand or a mom and pop, like, you have to be thinking, like, how am I going to connect with that audience? What's the whole suite of content that we can give them to engage with us to actually get them to speak a little bit about that, because I know that's a big part.
Well, I mean, you've got to be, of course, across the board. And now it can kind of, it's an endless question, though, Patrick. I mean, you can go anywhere at this point, from integrating content across a brand that's a travel brand, that you're creating shows that are meaningful, that can now be on a broadcast platform and syndication. They can be on cable, to they can be integrated in your airline or your rental car company or your train service. You can be integrated, this content that's now branded for them, that's meaningful and engaging for their customers, and it kind of creates. We've got a good friend who's in the loyalty business, right? And we talk a lot about really how you need to think about content today. Is it's almost part of a loyalty program. So traditionally, we've been on loyalty. I'm trying to reward you, trying to give you discounts, I'm trying to give you engagement. I'm trying to keep you engaged with my brand. It's the same when you start to think about content. You're creating loyalty to the brand and identification to it. So I think that's part of it. The other big challenge that I think we face in thinking about this cascade of where we have to go, right, and this long period of all the places you can air it, is how to fund it. And don't shoot me, Gina. don't shoot me, you guys out there, but maybe, just maybe, instead of us giving media commissions when you spend, or discounts on media commissions when you spend more, we reallocate those discounts straight over to creative. Maybe you peel off a percentage of your media budget and say, my overall media budget is this much. Hey, I might need to take 10% of that and pay attention over here to new creative be on a constant basis. Because the problem we face is when you have to go back to the C-suite and say, I need more money to activate these things, don't put yourself in that situation. Like, allocate a certain portion just to say, keep going to creative.
And I just want to, along the same lines, I went into creative measurement because it really is about that. So.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, but just to piggyback off where you're going, I think part of selling that in is understanding the customer journey and where each of those pieces of content is along that journey and having the right measurements in place to validate the use of that content. And so I think really mapping that out and being able to pull your creative back to that and the appropriate metrics back to each part of that journey helps make that a lot more palatable, whether or not you have to add more to the budget. So I think that's an important one too. And then from a creative measurement standpoint, I think we talked about this a little bit, figuring out the right mindset, planning ahead of time, designing with testing in mind. I think from a collaboration standpoint, that works nicely because I find that a lot of the media teams have great measurement tools, right? Like we're really focused on showing that ROI. And so because budgets are tight, one of the things that I sort of push for is finding out what sort of creative insights can be gleaned from each of those media tools. So we're only paying for one sort of, analytic, evaluation, but we're getting more out of it. So how can you get more out of the tools that you have, making sure that it's not just focused on media ROI or what ran where, but also what kind of creative insights can be gleaned from those same tools so that you're not asking your C-suite for a whole separate budget for testing that creative. So figuring out where you can sort of partner and make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck when it comes to tools that you're funding.
Yeah, and I think similar to setting up guardrails and KPIs at the start of testing, there's also a great opportunity to pull a small amount of budget up front and allocate a testing strategy throughout the year. And this is what this money is going to go towards. And here's phase one of what we set out to learn, what we learned, and what we're going to allocate phase $2 towards in testing right up front. This way you're not going back to ask for more. You're allocating up front to actually make sure that testing strategy comes through to fruition. And you can be nimble because the money is already pre-allocated out.
And the best part of that is like once you have those stellar results, like you planned on learning that and then it was awesome, that's an easier thing to sell in your C-suite because you have rock solid results and you're like, hey, we want more money just to make more money, and we can prove out that it's going to work. So I think it's great.
And I think to your point as well, the in-flight optimization is what we can call it, right? Because we're out there and if you're able to then glean and look inside there and find creative elements that are working, that are more effective, and because you have so much more data and so many more places to measure across, right? If you can find those pieces and get back to media and creative feeding each other in the optimization path to where I can come back to you and say, okay, look, we thought this, while we're still in flight, let's tweak this out to have these additional creative elements or these additional message points to put in the same funnel because we're seeing it working in other spaces. You can optimize that path and again, have enough time to really, to prove it out. So when you go back to the C-suite and you say, hey, here it is, this is now what we know, this is what's been proven, and here's how we're gonna activate, this model for the next, 12 months, next year, next quarter, whatever it's gonna be.
And I think it's also making sure that your learnings align, right? Like if you tested a certain channel from a media perspective, but you didn't have the right creative work in there, you only have half the story, right? And so it might be worth revisiting some previous learnings with new creative in mind because you're putting your best foot forward where you might not have been before. So I think it's making sure that as you're partnering and sort of planning for what the year looks like, you're doing that together and making sure that you're not learning something that I'm not ready to give you, something like that.
Yeah. Great. Some questions for our panelists. Anybody? Any questions? One second.
Enjoyed what you all had to say, except for the part where you kept on making the analogies to learning to fly the plane while you're on it, because all of us who have to fly back and forth to our homes didn't love
Sorry.
that.
Sorry.
It's not you alone.
We build engines fast. It's fine.
But what I
Rapid
liked
learning.
a lot is, you know, you talked a little bit about partnering with platform, and I think what I found, which is also valuable, is that right now it's completely a buyer's market. So when you collaborate with your platform partners, then they have skin in the game. So when they say, I absolutely think this is what you've got to do, and it doesn't work, then you can go back to them and ask them for such an, to basically collaborate and also put their money where their mouth is. So that's something that I've found that's also really helpful, just on top of all the things that you guys are saying. But such great content. Thank you all very much.
And I think with those partners, right, like when they do have skin in the game, it's also really helpful because they learn very quickly not to throw out things that can't be validated, right? So when they're throwing out those recommendations, and you go back and say, okay, show me the data that proves out that works, and we'll run something similar, they've got to be able to ante up and share that information with you, or at least explain the thinking behind why. So I think it's great to get them involved early and often. They're invested, and then I think they're a lot more thoughtful about what they bring to the table, because they want to make sure that anything that they bring to you is, tried and true and validated. Totally.
And I think it's beyond. It's like we talked about earlier. It's beyond about activating your internal teams on figuring out the tools and being thoughtful and going forward. But yes, activating your providers and make them your partners, make them strategic partners in that mix, so that feedback goes back and forth. But treat them as if they were a strategic member of your team, because they are.
Yeah, totally.
Because we don't get the message out there without them. So.
Okay. Next question. There was somebody else here? No? Anybody else?
I was just going to say that with all these suites of creative that you guys do, I have not seen enough in the 10-second realm lately, or really almost ever from most of you. And you probably may or may not know, but there are 10-second spots on broadcast daytime TV shows that reach millions daily that a lot of creative people forget about. So something to think about.
We're testing those activations in the shows, like we're putting them in syndication across the platform. We are putting 10-second spots embedded and driving them back, but we're also doing pop-ups inside there with QR codes, QR codes pushing back to engage in regular content. So creating response mechanisms embedded inside the show content. So it's a little different, and where we're experimenting on our end is like, okay, let's put it out there and see if we can prove at this point, bring it back to not just the C-suite, but bring it back to me, and me be able to see it and say, look, here it is. Here's the activation points. This is a new one. This network is working. This channel is working with these triggers, right? And seeing how that starts to work inside content. So it's not just like putting a snipe up, on one of the digital, or one of the networks, or one of the cable networks, but it's literally embedding those messages inside your content for the long term. Because remember, if you have a good show out there and you have good quality content, it can spread for years and years and years. That activation can go for well beyond what you think it would. We still have stuff that we did 6 years ago on Blackstone that's still driving back revenue today. And when you start to look back and see that history, so yes, I think there is opportunity in there. But that message, to that point, that message in 10 seconds it's a different message. It's got to be a direct drive, and then where I drive them to at that point, I have to drive them to a deeper funnel of content. I need to get them inside of my progression and my funnel, so I can be like, and here's what you need next to understand, and here's what you need next to understand, and look how cool the brand is, and wow, look at these user-generated testimonials that would be in an infomercial normally. The path is the same. It's just how you're delivering it in bite-sized messages in that path. So it's 10 seconds works if you're driving them the right place.
I think ad formats are getting shorter and shorter. Traditional ad formats are getting shorter and shorter. And I think one of the points that you make that's really important is like figuring out what content you need to build around that. So that even though the ad unit is still getting smaller and smaller, it's still just as impactful because it's embedded within a larger framework of sort of creative and content development that's bringing people to your brand, and then that's just selling them through on the action.
Yeah, it's also bringing you out of the traditional ad pod and more merging what you would say as an ad pod into content. and taking those two worlds and bringing them together. And for the consumer, that's one of the more seamless ways to keep them engaged if they think they're watching the content versus an advertisement.
Totally.
Yeah, listen, we all have we all have brands that we follow and believe in, right? I have a Chevy Suburban. Why do I buy another Chevy Suburban? Because I totaled a Chevy Suburban and all my kids were okay. I will buy a Chevy Suburban until my kids are out of the house, and then I'm gonna buy something really fast and scary. But but it's beyond that connectivity. So right, that message and that connectivity and where you sit with that brand and that connectivity with the brand is, again, like I said before, it becomes part of who you are. We all have those brands that we relate to in some way. And I'm sure you can, beyond farmers, by the way, my kids kill me. I have 4 daughters, and every time those spots come on, they hit it. We are farmers. I said, no, you're Latimers. But highly effective, highly engaging, like it triggers. But even stories like that, or even having, I could imagine something for you guys where it's user-generated people singing the song, across the board, right? And seeing people in different walks of life that become engaging content that go beyond it. And then carrying, I'm sure for you, getting them into the funnel and then really opening up all the things that you offer is the harder picture, right?
Totally. I think it's all about bringing them into the ecosystem and keeping them there, like you were saying. It's a lot about, it's very interesting to be thinking about the content development as more of a loyalty play. I think that's one of the interesting nuggets that was worth noodling on, I think, for a lot of different brands, is understanding how that's more than just your advertising. It's also sort of a retention play as well.
Yeah. Great. I think that's was about it for time, right?
Well, if there's any other questions, now's the time. Anyone?
Great.
All right, well, thank you guys. How about a round of applause for our group here?
Great.